Welcome back to another edition of Check Call. Don't forget to subscribe to Check Call, the newsletter on FreightWaves.com if you haven't already. Today we welcome Jameson Goforth, Vice President LTL at ITS Logistics. Thanks so much for joining us today, Jameson.
Thank you. I'm excited to be on.
I'm excited about today because we get to go back to my roots. We get to go back to all things LTL, and that will always carry a soft spot in my heart because once you understand LTL, it's really weird and complicated at first, but once you're in, and it's like a new level of transportation's unlocked where you're like, I actually understand what a discount is and what a rate base is. But before we get too far into that, let's get some background on you and how you got started at ITS.
Awesome. Yeah. Who doesn't love LTL besides, 90% of shippers in America? I'm Jameson. I lead our LTL division here at ITS. I have been an asset LTL guy my entire career, always local to the Reno market, generally, managing territories and operations across the West Coast. So when ITS made the decision to get into the LTL game and to really start driving some of the activity through LTL within the organization, it was like a perfect fit. So I've been following ITS, been a big fan for a long time, and I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited as well, just because I love a good 3PL solution that's got a good LTL component. But that's just that's me being completely 1000% biased because there is no freight like LTL freight. It is the best out there.
That's right.
Even like the floor loaded garbage, like just puffed plastic freight, give it to me. I'll take it. I'll find someone that can haul it. So when it comes to hauling LTL freight, there's I'm going to assume that everybody understands there is a class system that comes with it. Each code or each product has a different class it's rated at, and that class obviously determines how much it can be charged. But there have recently been some changes from the NMFTA around the different class systems. Do you mind kind of breaking down how these ratings have changed kind of like on a super high level without getting too far into the weeds?
Okay, so first of all, as a former 3PL pricing analyst on the LTL side, you should know you cannot assume that everybody understands LTL class, but
that is
set
fair.
that aside and talk a little bit about the NMFC changes that are coming up in July. Effectively, to your point, class-based system, every commodity has a class assigned to it by the NMFTA through the National Motor Freight Classification System. So they have a 5-6 digit code that kind of tells the carriers, here's the class assigned to this commodity. And it's based on a ton of different characteristics, whether that be stowability or density or a number of risk factors that kind of tries to naturalize each product from a costing perspective. So what's happened though is there become tens of thousands of these, and they're all different, and it's really challenging for your average shipper to understand what is my correct class. What if I have multiple commodities that are on the same pallet or within the same shipment? So with that, the NMFC has really done a great job of trying to spearhead that and take the uncertainty out of it and move all of these to a density-based, and not everything, but there's some 2,000 plus commodities that are moving in July to a density-based model. So all you really have to know is the weight and the dimensions of the pallets that you're shipping, and you can pretty quickly get to a class, which again helps the carriers understand pricing a little bit better, helps the shippers more naturally get to a class that makes sense for their commodity. So that's coming in July. We're excited, I think, as a LTL community about that. I think there's still a lot more to do as far as streamlining that process, but this is an awesome step forward. So kudos to the NMFTA on that.
I could not applaud this change more. As someone who has thought over whether granola is something that is like a foodstuffs or a prepared cereal or however you want to do it, the amount of fights that I've had over something that I did not know there was more than 5 different ways to classify it. Or my favorite is when a shipper says, here's all of the different NMFC codes that we have for this one product. And I'm like, hey, none of those are the same class. None of those are the same class. We just went from 50 to 250 on basically a swing set. So this is going to be great. So personally, I cannot like holler from the rooftops enough about about this change because it's really, like you said, it's really going to free up a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknown. It is going to be a pain in the butt at the beginning to kind of transition to it and get everything worked out. But I think in the long term, it's going to help people. It's just gonna help more than it's gonna be annoying, like it's gonna be like, ah, man, we gotta switch it. But then you're not gonna sit there fighting for 3 months with a carrier's billing team about how this is actually class 75 instead of 125.
Absolutely. I could not agree more. I mean, like, there's a need for a class-based system. We just need to make it easier for shippers to get an understanding of what they should be classifying their freight as.
Yeah. So when it comes to, obviously, you guys have a lot of shippers that you work with right now, and then you're also constantly prospecting because, what's life without constant prospecting and onboarding new customers? How are you guys kind of saying, okay, how are you approaching it back to your shippers to say, okay, hey, things are changing, not from us, but from like a whole industry level? How do you kind of approach them and say, hey, things are changing. We need to educate you on how this new thing's going to go. But don't worry, like your freight's still going to go. And then this is how it's going to change. This is how it's going to affect your current pricing that you have in place. How are you kind of broaching those conversations?
Constant communication. So we've had communication with each one of our shippers throughout every iteration of this. The NMFTA has put out like in scope classes or commodities that they've been talking about, and they've been going up and down and sideways, and they finally had the final list that just came out. But constant communication throughout that process about, hey, your classification code, or excuse me, your NMFC code is within scope, and this is the way it's going to change. I'll give you a perfect example. We have an alcohol shipper that today everything runs at class 125, 100% of their freight, no matter what. But come July, it's going to move to a density-based item, and that's going to fall, to class 60, 50, whatever, as a super dense commodity. So we're just getting in front of it with them and helping them understand that some of these things are going to change. It's always not going to be net benefit, net negative. Like our solution is to keep costs as neutral as possible, because at the end of the day, the shipment has not changed. So if it was costing well for a carrier in June, it should cost well for a carrier in July, right? So whether that be um, the density based item or a straight classification item.
I think, are you guys kind of, because I'm trying to like, because if everything's moving and, I guess I'm just kind of wondering like this, this is just me being curious. This means you have to rewrite a whole bunch of pricing agreements, doesn't it?
That's a really great question. And like, we're going to be involved in that process, but I think most of the lift on that is going to come from the carriers, because they're the ones that are working through their costing models and understanding what these implications are. Most of my conversations with the top carriers recently, specifically at SMC a couple of weeks ago, is that it's going to just be a rolling approach, and they're going to try to address these as fairly as possible. I do think every one of the carriers, I almost said 90%, but all of them just want a fair rate for the freight that they're hauling, that fits well in their network, that is profitable for them. And I think most shippers want that as well. So you're 100% right. Like, carriers today are not built for flip of the switch. I have to re-underwrite all of this costing for thousands and thousands of my existing customers. So that's going to be a lot of fun to see kind of where that goes. Proactive is what we keep telling our shippers. Like, we should not be one of the ones that are in August scrambling for a new pricing agreement, or we're checking now, we're opening up the business to bid and all of that. Like, we should have very transparent conversations ahead of that get us to as close to a cost neutral solution as possible.
Yeah, because it's not just, oh, we're gonna go into the contract and just change all of our classes and like, oh, these NMFC codes are at this. It's a lot more than that, because if you have originally bidded, yeah. if you've originally bid on on the, freight that has a healthy mix, maybe it's got some 250, 125, 60, 75, that carrier's provided pricing for that. So if you come back and say, just kidding, it's all changing to 60 now, that could potentially kind of disrupt that network, or at least that hub that shipper's at. So it's kind of like throwing an entire bid season at a carrier for all of their customers. And that sounds like a fresh level of hell. I'm not gonna lie.
I could not agree more. I think most of the carriers have strategies by now that are not going to put them in that position, whether that just be like sort of making adjustments on their rolling standard GRI perspective or getting ahead of it. Like one of the benefits they have is they've got representation on every single one of these accounts. So um, it's going to be a bear for most of them to like identify even what shippers are impacted, because that data is not in every system readily available to just yank out. But like I said, they have representation in all these accounts. They can get in front of it. They can have these conversations. And again, I think in general, the carrier community is just looking to whatever I was getting paid yesterday, I want to get paid today because it worked yesterday. Nothing is fundamentally changed with the shipment, right? It's an arbitrary classification that we've assigned to it that's changing. So like I think in general, as long as everybody is executes on what I've heard sort of from the market, we're going to be okay. It'll be a little bumpy, and the shippers that aren't super proactive with it will have a little bit of pain for a handful of weeks, but we'll get past it, and there are brighter days to come from a classification perspective.
That kind of, if as long as you're proactive, I think that really kind of calls out when you are a shipper or a carrier or even a 3PL freight broker or anything like that, that's where that partnership comes in. You really want to see those relationships, because I know that if I'm a shipper, well, I know that my logistics service provider is taking care of that for me. They're proactive. They're working on it, or at least I want them to be. So that way I'm not left, day one flip switch going, why are my rates higher? Why is this happening? Why am I getting all of these invoices that aren't getting paid in a timely manner and up for disputes? And so I really kind of think that relies on those relationships, because again, as a logistics service provider, I would want to go to my carriers ahead of time and say, hey, we've got this coming. What's our plan? How can we do this? What works? What timetable works for you? I have to take this to my shipper. This is what this is going to look like for me. And this is my kind of timeline that I need on my side. What's yours? Because yeah, like you said, in the grand scheme of things, like your rates will still, for the most part, stay the same. Nothing too crazy is happening, but it's a matter of taking a step back, looking at kind of each business and say, okay, this is fine. This is fine. We need to make some adjustments. And then also ultimately, getting all of that updated in a system. And I don't know anyone that has gotten, invoicing updated quickly at a lot of the major LTL carriers.
What do you mean? I think it's totally fine.
I have held on to an invoice for 6 months just out of sheer spite.
Yeah, that's a really good call out. I think that's one of the benefits of an asset light provider or a non-asset provider, is like the burden of proof on the bill of lading is upon the shipper, right? Like the carrier is not mandated to check that at time of pickup or anything like that. They're going to go back and do their due diligence once they have the shipment on hand and make the corrections where necessary. But like, you need to advocate on behalf of your shippers if you're an asset light provider, and bring these things to them. Like that's 100% of the value add, right? Sure, you have technology and you have all these other things, but you should have an expert in the field that is staying on top of these things, that is coming to you proactively and saying, hey, here are the 3 things that could potentially change. Here's our roadmap to fix that. So I think in general, if you're a direct shipper, you should be having these conversations today. And then if you're using a third-party logistics provider that's not having these conversations with you yet, like, you should reevaluate.
1,000%. And because if you have someone that's like, oh, we're going to take over your LTL and we got it. Don't worry about it. Like, we've got you. And like, they don't have you. Well, it might be a really great time to prospect that person and say, don't worry, we actually have you.
Yeah. I do. I mean, I am positive that there's going to be a flurry of very targeted to commodities that have changed prospecting across the industry, whether that's carriers or 3PLs, like it's going to be a ripe place to try to grow the pipeline.
That is always kind of my favorite part of, like, big changes like this is, um, I feel like you can always tell where mistakes were made based off of how customers might shift or how you might have, like, a redistribution of things. It's always just very interesting to me how those end up shaking out because it's almost more telling than if someone's came out and said, "Well, we really bungled this one."
100%.
So, you guys have taken a more proactive approach because of who you are as people, basically. Um, but do you what kind of lessons have you learned in these classification conversations with your shippers and carrier partners saying, maybe if it's just like a lack of education among people or breaking down why it is, what kind of lessons have you guys learned in being these and having these proactive conversations?
I think that the number one thing I've learned, and this is agnostic, whether that be with our carrier partners or our shipper partners, is everybody wants the exact same thing. So now it's just a function of how do we execute. Like the shipper wants relatively cost neutral impact. The carrier wants the same thing. The shipper and carrier both want a profitable piece of business. So it's really just about how do we get to that end goal. And I think, again, kudos to the NMFTA. Like there's plenty of runway here to get this done. So it's going to be upon each shipper, upon each carrier, upon each service provider to start these conversations early and start having these conversations so that we're not all sitting here in August going, why is my freight 4 times more expensive right now, which is like a realistic thing that could happen with some of these class changes. And on the inverse, something that gets talked about a little bit less is you don't want to be the carrier sitting there holding the bag either, saying, why am I moving the exact same shipment with the exact same characteristics to the exact same places for, a third of the revenue? Like it doesn't make sense for anybody, including the shipper. So that's what I've learned the best is I think this happens more often than not as a LTL community. Like we're all trying to get to the same place. And it's just whether that's vernacular or, a little bit of headbutting or whatever you want to call it. It's a challenging to get there at times, but we're all running towards the same end zone. And I think that as long as that stays to be the case, it's all about execution.
I absolutely love that. It's the how can we how can we keep things going as they are? Because the one thing I love about LTL is once you kind of have it set up and you kind of have those first few months of working up the kinks, as long as you don't touch it, it runs. Like just don't touch it. Don't look at
Look
it.
at it.
Don't even think about it. Just keep it going. And because really, once you get past those first few months, you've kind of made it all through any like audit problems or your invoicing's all good, your pickups are flowing. That's the one thing I do love about LTL is like once you set it, you can more or less forget it, kind of like a Showtime rotisserie chicken. And this is kind of taking that spotlight back and saying, okay, we need to change something, but also not change anything. And it is kind of like a balance, you gotta have to say like we're not changing things but we are, but also nobody on the operations side look at it, touch it, or do anything. Just keep doing what you're doing, we'll figure the rest out.
100%. And you're totally right because it's such a nuanced mode. Like it's so different than any of these other modes that you look at from whether that be accessorials or now, I mean, just classification by itself, you could do an entire semester course on, like it's pretty insane. So the deeper you get into it, like as a mode of transportation, the more you appreciate how like orchestrated it is for how many moving parts there are. And like, that it gets a little bad rap from a, damage loss perspective, but in actuality, it's like running an airline almost, like everybody gets mad when you have a 30-minute delay. But if you were to be able to back out and say like, look at all the things that went right to where this was only 30 minutes late. It's crazy impressive. So I agree. And I appreciate your love for LTL. I'm with you on it.
Yeah, it's one of those where the second someone's like, "Oh, well, it's already picked up. Can we change it en route?" I'm like, "No. No, we don't change anything. We just let it do its thing, and if it's at the wrong spot, well, we'll come pick it up later. Like, don't worry about it. Cause it's just because everything is so many moving parts to move any one of them like upsets a huge apple cart. So you're just like, we'll figure it out later. Don't worry.
Yeah.
So so we've kind of touched on, some of those challenges that you guys have seen. Do you see any like big impacts to the industry as a whole, other than maybe just making it easier to get things started and to kind of reduce the amount of squabbling that happens with a classification?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the positive implications will be around FAKs, which are largely going away anyways, or at least people are, most of the carrier community is trying. Like it's a challenging thing to cost on their side when you're just saying, hey, this is one class regardless of what I ship, or this one range of classes. I think the more we streamline the actual classification process, the more you can get that out, because there's legitimate concern. There's some people that want it because they think an FAK is going to drive cheaper rates, and that's just not factual. But most of them, the sophisticated shippers, want it because I might have 10 different classes on this pallet and it's really challenging. Some of them are working on, like, some of the largest shippers in America are working on really old technology that maybe is more challenged to classify multiple commodities. So I think that will be a big play for this, is like, where do we go here from just standardizing the classification system? So it's one thread across, it's not everything yet, but call it 95% of the commodities.
The amount of large shippers in the US that use AS400 is astounding. And if anyone has ever used AS400, it doesn't care. It is just like, nope, this is the one option you have. You can have no other customization and nothing can be broken out.
Well, first of all, as I said earlier, I am a legacy asset LTL guy. So I have a big piece of my heart is reserved for AS400. Like, it needs to go away, but I do love it. It is a powerful tool for how simple it is. So don't speak too poorly
I
about it,
mean,
because
look,
you are
I
going to have
love a
some.
good AS400 as much as the next girl, but like, I think its time has come,
Yeah,
Like,
I agree. I can't argue that.
if I can't click anywhere, I feel like we maybe
Yeah, you're
should
not
just,
clicking tab. Get
yeah.
real friendly with tab.
Yeah, if I can't click anywhere, I feel like we should maybe just take one small step into the future. But that being said, it is a workhorse. Like, there is a reason it is still around. Um, but yeah, I'm excited for more excited. I'd say I'm the most excited for possibly the death of the FAKs. Because I could do a whole episode on how it doesn't actually save shippers as much money as they think it does. But that's a
100%.
different time.
I mean, the carriers are super sophisticated now, which has really been a revelation from, call it, the last 5 to 10 years. They know what it costs them to haul freight now, which was not always the case. And so, you could probably, if you have enough density, you could probably get away with, commanding an FAK, especially in this market. But you're going to pay for it in one direction or another. They know what it costs them. They know how much revenue they need to make that a profitable piece of business. It's not, you're not pulling fast one over anybody anymore. Like you definitely could have done 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's time for that to go as well. Just because, like you said, you're gonna pay. It doesn't matter what the shenanigans you try. Like, carrier's gonna get his money, which they should, because they're moving freight. So that being said, Jameson, we are near the end of our time together today, but there is a question that everybody comes on the show has to answer. Could potentially be the hardest question that you've asked all day, even with listening to AS400 slander. If you could build a house out of any food, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a hard one. I'm going to go with sushi. I'd have like a little rainbow roll as a couch, and like maybe like a Tabiko floor mat. Yeah, no, I'm going to go with sushi. I love sushi. I could eat the TV. It'd be phenomenal.
So then, would your sinks be soy sauce?
No, absolutely. Well, the sinks would just be a soy sauce dish, but
Yes.
then soy sauce itself would flow out of the faucets like naturally.
Got it. I like that. I like that. As a deep sushi lover, I would love all of the different rolls in each room. Like, have maybe like a California roll wall, an avocado roll, a dragon roll, get it all.
My kids are like playing in a sandbox that's filled with wasabi. I could see it like in my head very visually right now.
Yes. I mean, just maybe don't touch the wasabi to your
Yeah,
face because that would
that could be
hurt a lot.
dangerous.
All right. So, if anyone has any questions or ideas for a sushi house, or if they have questions on kind of what these changes to the classification system mean for them, where can they find you outside the show?
LinkedIn is always great. Jameson Goforth. I am pretty confident I'm the only one with that name. So you can go ahead and just use the search bar for that. But yeah, reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I had a blast.
Find Check Out the Podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, like Apple Podcast and Spotify. Don't forget to check out all the other incredible FreightWaves shows, and don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter on freightwaves.com/checkcall. See you on the internet.